One perspective that's interested in these issues of deep causation and underlying ecological and social dynamics related to health is political ecology. Broadly speaking, political ecology is an interdisciplinary perspective that combines insight and methods from across the social and natural sciences, including political economy, ecology, social anthropology, and human geography, to account for the ways that politics and history shape the social and natural environments in which humans live. In a nutshell, political ecology can be considered to represent a synthetic set of approaches to integrating ecologically rooted social science and principles of political economy. Political ecologists are interested in how different social, political, and environmental processes interact in different contexts and across scales, from micro and local to global. As such, political ecological analysis can facilitate a more nuanced approach to problems of disease emergence that takes into account processes that can increase risk to people in specific places, and how these local processes, dynamics, and different forms of knowledge, for example, scientific knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge, are enmeshed in broader trends and processes related to economic globalization and environmental change. Applying political ecological analysis to questions of the production of health means directing focus on the human-environment relationships and understandings that are formed and transformed by cross-scalar social, political, economic, and ecological processes. Rather than searching for linear explanations of causality, political ecology embraces complexity and asks how these human-environment relationships shape the context of health risk and disease emergence. Many of the processes that drive changes associated with reemergence of old and emergence of new infectious diseases are influenced by the distribution of political and economic power and human-environment relationships and dynamics at a variety of scales, ranging, as we said before, from transnational down to the household and individual levels. According to a political ecology of disease perspective, distribution of health risk is associated with the distribution of economic and political power. Some, or even much of this power, is influenced by which groups control decisions over, for example, land use and development. These factors interact with other social and environmental changes and decisions that people make, influencing the relationships of people in the natural world, including relationships that can increase chances of novel disease emergence, microbial evolution, zoonotic or cross-species transmission of pathogens, and geographic shifts in the range of vectors and pathogens that they carry. These are basic principles of political ecology that have been used in understanding the consequences, in terms of health, of human-environment interactions. Disease emergence can be described in terms of four broad categories. 1. Newly identified pathogens. 2. Pathogens that may have evolved from a known pathogen. 3. Pathogens that make a jump between different species. And 4. Pathogens that spread to a new population or area undergoing ecologic transformation. It's important to note that re-emerging infections are diseases that were major problems in the past and then declined dramatically before again becoming a significant problem. New diseases are those that have been discovered or described by scientists since the 1970s. Just a few of these are rotavirus, a major cause of infant diarrhea worldwide that accounts for up to 50% of all hospitalizations for gastroenteritis. Ebola virus, first described in 1977, which causes hemorrhagic symptoms, and in 2014 caused a massive epidemic in Western Africa. Hantavirus, described in 1977, which can cause renal failure, hemorrhagic symptoms, and shock. And human immunodeficiency virus, the virus that causes AIDS, which was discovered by science in 1983, and since the start of the epidemic has infected about 78 million people and killed about 39 million. The idea of new diseases can be problematic. When a new pathogen is discovered, that simply means that it's been formally scientifically documented. Calling such pathogens new rather than newly documented or newly described can divert attention from the fact that these pathogens may in fact be very well known to local populations of people who may have extensive knowledge on the origins of infection, effects of the infection on the body, and the efficacy of different modes of treatment. The second category of disease emergence is due to microbial mutation through recombination, either increasing the pathogenicity of microbes or the transformation of microbes into pathogens. This can allow the development of resistance to the immune response or to effective antimicrobial treatment. Resistance develops as a result of overuse and inappropriate use of antimicrobial drugs in treatment, poorly planned use of antimalarials, and excessive use of antibiotics in the food supply. Examples of the latter include tuberculosis. MDR-TB, or multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis, is defined as tuberculosis that is resistant to at least 2 first-line tuberculosis drugs. XDR-TB is extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis and describes increasing risk of the tuberculosis bacillus developing resistance to major second-line drugs. Falciparum malaria, which is largely resistant to chloroquine and several other drugs, is caused by the Plasmodium falciparum parasite caused by Anopheles mosquitoes. Mass drug administration programs during the 1950s and 1960s may have contributed to the rise of chloroquine resistance, making this cheap treatment ineffective in many areas around the world. This has led to the development of combination drug therapies, but these are often too costly for people and carry some harmful side effects. Cholera has developed widespread antibiotic resistance due to similar processes. Up to 75% of E. coli strains, which cause diarrheal disease, manifest antibiotic resistance. Bacterial pneumonia, in which roughly 2 out of 100 cases are resistant to antibiotic therapy, and methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, commonly known as MRSA or MRSA, which has become a major infection risk in hospitals. The third category of disease emergence is the cross-species transfer of pathogens, or zoonosis, which results in the novel introduction of a pathogen into the human population. Examples of zoonotic diseases include rabies, anthrax, type A influenzas, prion diseases, Lassa fever, Lyme disease, HIV, and Ebola virus disease. Zoonoses usually occur when people live in close proximity to either wild or domesticated animals, or due to alterations in human-environment relations that can change human-livestock-wildlife interactions. These changes can push wild populations of animals into close proximity with humans or livestock, increasing the chances that cross-species transmission will occur. It's important to remember that transmission can occur between wild or domesticated animals and humans, and that this can occur in rural areas as well as urban areas where humans and animals interact. The fourth category of disease emergence that we introduced earlier is that which is due to a geographic shift in disease incidence and/or prevalence. We can illustrate geographic shifts in disease prevalence with a couple of examples from the United States: dengue fever and West Nile virus. Dengue fever is a mosquito-borne disease that causes flu-like symptoms, a rash, and in some cases hemorrhagic symptoms. Traditionally considered a tropical disease, there has been a marked increase in the spread of dengue throughout the world since the Second World War, and particularly since the 1960s. This has been associated primarily with patterns of ecological disturbance and climatic shifts that have expanded the habitat range of the insect vector of dengue, the Aedes mosquito. However, the threat of dengue is not limited to developing or tropical regions. It has also spread throughout the United States since the 1990s quite rapidly and following a south-to-north pattern. Mosquitoes capable of carrying and transmitting diseases like dengue fever now live in at least 28 out of 50 U.S. states. As temperatures increase, rainfall patterns change, and summers become longer, insects carrying dengue can remain active for longer seasons and in wider areas, greatly increasing the risk for people who live there. The same is true on a global scale. Increases in heat, precipitation, and humidity can allow tropical and subtropical insects to move from regions where infectious diseases thrive into new places. However, other processes are at play as well and affect the rates of morbidity from dengue in different ways in different places. For example, in the past few decades, rapid urbanization in regions in India, the Philippines, and South America has caused difficulty in maintaining proper sanitation and infrastructure and has created an ideal environment for mosquito proliferation in new cities. West Nile virus was relatively unknown until the 1990s outside of the West Nile region of Uganda, but has rapidly spread globally. West Nile is often asymptomatic, can cause flu-like symptoms, and is also associated with a severe and lethal form of encephalopathy. West Nile virus is a mosquito-borne disease, but birds are a common reservoir of the disease, with insects carrying the disease between birds and humans and other animals. It can be contracted by a variety of species, including, as I said, humans. As you will see from this series of maps, West Nile virus first entered the United States in 1999. It rapidly expanded westward across the country, affecting nearly half of the states in the United States by 2001. By 2005, over 16,000 cases had been reported. Warmer temperatures, heavy rainfall, and high humidity have reportedly increased the rate of human infection. In 2012, the U.S. state of Texas experienced one of the worst ever epidemics of West Nile virus in the world, in which 286 people died of complications. The disease is now considered endemic in most of the United States, and especially the U.S. South. The four categories of disease emergence are rarely clear-cut. Most emerging and re-emerging infections can be traced to complex processes of change that are rarely purely local. These involve, for example, the intensification of food production, resulting in new areas being brought under cultivation and disrupting ecosystems, monoculture cropping, which reduces biodiversity and forces viruses to seek new hosts, rapid urbanization, resulting in high population densities and poor sanitary conditions, and global warming, which is extending the habitats of mosquitoes and other disease vectors within regions. Competition for resources contributes to wars, which disrupt public health systems and trigger mass population movements. Global processes, including climate change and economic globalization, can confound and interact with all of these local and regional processes to intensify risk of disease emergence. Global climate change affects the ranges of infectious diseases and vectors. It causes extreme weather events and creates conditions conducive to clusters of insect, rodent, and waterborne diseases. And the acceleration of climate change carries uncertainties and challenges for public health and society into the future. Economic globalization is associated with an intensification in global flows of people, animals, and microbes. It's also associated with increasing social and economic inequalities. Increasing decentralization, privatization, and other policy movements associated with economic globalization affects the capabilities of governments to detect and respond to health threats and has drastic implications for public health systems. Improving the epidemiological surveillance for emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases must involve enhancing capacity of governments to identify potential hotspots of disease emergence. This can happen by strengthening epidemiological surveillance capabilities and public health systems. Considering the complexity of disease dynamics, cross-sector flow of information and coordination is necessary to understand how human-environment relationships affect disease emergence and re-emergence, and how policy action can help these situations. Particularly in developing countries, this will require significant donor support to achieve. A second area of action involves supporting the integrative application of social science, ecological research, recent pharmaceutical discoveries, and new biomedical technologies to the identification, management, and control of emerging diseases. This includes developing platforms and guidance based on the most recent research and knowledge to provide information to guide prevention and treatment strategies. This also includes considering different forms of knowledge about disease ecology. A final area relates to containment, control, and equity. Many of these diseases are preventable and treatable through vaccination and adequate medical treatment. But because much of the mortality from infectious diseases occurs in developing countries, the cost of vaccination and treatment is high, prohibitively so in many cases. The major lesson to be learned from, for example, the HIV/AIDS pandemic and the Ebola virus disease epidemic of 2014 is that several assumptions, including the assumption that infectious diseases are a phenomenon of the past or largely restricted as major health threats to developing countries, and that international health consists of the study of problems of developing countries, are all erroneous.